And on to the next one. Back in 2015, during what I would call my scumbag era, I pulled off a scam that still weighs on me to this day. It all started pretty innocently. One of my friends had a gift certificate for a local pizza place. It wasn't a big chain, just a small family-run spot. The gift certificate was printed on basic paper with the dollar amount and a handwritten signature. Nothing fancy. Right away, I noticed how easy it would be to fake it. So I scanned it, photoshopped out the price, added my own amount, forged the signature, and printed off a stack of fake ones. My friend was down, and soon we had another buddy in on it too. We had a little system. I'd go in and use one, then a few days later my friend would go, then the third guy. We rotated who picked up the pizza to avoid drawing attention. This went on for about 3 months. We probably walked away with over $1,000 worth of free food, and we never got caught. But eventually, I started to feel horrible about it. It wasn't some massive corporation. It was a family business. People working hard, probably scraping by. I put an end to the whole thing and never did anything like that again. It's been almost 10 years, and I still feel guilty. I know I'll never be able to pay them back or undo it, but I wanted to at least put it out there. Even if I didn't get caught, I know what I did, and that's enough. And crawling underground to destroy a Viet Cong tunnel. Crouch walking through the tunnels, they find a not-so-hidden booby trap. It's one of those ones booby traps that would release a bunch of scorpions or snakes upon tripping it. Grandfather and Daniel stop to consider their options. Figure that they might be able to disarm the trap. How hard could it be? Pretty hard apparently. This one was very complex for some reason. Not sure how to disarm the trap without releasing poisonous death animals. They decide to just blow the fucker up. Hope that the tunnel doesn't collapse. America. Back up a good bit. Lob a grenade over in the general direction. Wait. Collateral damage. Trap is gone. Continue forward. As they get to where the former trap was, they notice another tunnel, exposed by the grenade. One of the new tunnels comes a 5-foot-long centipede, which barrels right past them and down deeper into the tunnels. Not wanting another incident like with the spiders, they plant their charges and haul ass out of the tunnel. They make it out of the tunnels, shaken but no worse for wear. Pic related is the first thing Google gave me when I typed Vietnam centipede. Sorry for slow typing, dealing with stuff in the real world, on and off. Any run-ins with the my life. Male 25. Moved to California about a month before the pandemic. Came to start a small production company in the Bay Area with my longtime best friend. I met an older woman about a week before the pandemic that turned into an intense romance, and we fled the Bay Area for the SoCal desert around the second week of March. I was immediately intoxicated by the landscape and felt an incredible draw to the environment and its earthly beauty. The magenta-kissed mountains at dawn, the soft afternoon breeze, the psychedelic sunsets. What started as a 2-week stint, she returned to her parents' home to quarantine, we still remained together, turned into 9 months plus of staying there. I've always enjoyed isolation and felt it was a positive, detoxifying place for me to be after living in New York for almost 7 years. It started slow, with just a few sips of something to take the edge off and relax while watching the sunset. As the nights followed, what started as a few sips turned into glass upon glass upon glass. Frequently, if not every night, for nearly 4 months straight, finishing a half a handle. I would religiously, each night, light candles and listen to music, and it just all felt so calm. It seemed in some way to amplify the beauty of the desert environment. It helped me feel something, I guess, I hadn't felt before. Free. Although I was strictly drinking mezcal, which never left me with a single hangover, I did not realize the effects of such heavy drinking on my day-to-day cognitive function. The euphoria I would experience each night, at times almost psychedelic in nature, flowed into my everyday, and the feeling of confidence, invincibility, and what I can only describe as true happiness only grew deeper. I was running half marathons, taking some of the strongest photographs of my career and making a ton of new friends. However, these feelings were also leading me to make extremely rash and erratic decisions, from making extremely speculative investments at huge losses, cheating on my girlfriend with multiple women, and carelessly making mistakes at my job, and withdrawing all of my life savings to purchase a piece of land in the desert. The effects of the liquor only compounded and compounded, with each decision and action being more careless and thoughtless than the last. And by the end of the summer, I'd been fired from my job, had nearly thrown away my career, was in nearly $100,000 worth of debt, and was on the brink of losing my girlfriend. Now in 2021, I've been sober for nearly 32 days, but am still just clawing back at the effects of my alcoholism from last year. I don't know what it was that drove me to drink in such excess, spend in such excess, act without any regard for the true consequences of my actions for myself and those around me. How I allowed my life to completely spiral out of control. Perhaps it was what I felt the alcohol alleviated from my lifelong battle with depression and anxiety. During those summer months, I can't remember feeling sad or anxious or lonely a single time. I can't lie. I wish, more than anything, in the world to feel like that again. I've been battling S-word thoughts more recently and weirdly fantasizing about living out the last few months of my life like that again. Just to feel like that one more time. But I know I can't, because it will destroy whatever it is I have left. Sick of people faking too. Reddit is home to thousands of communities, a lot of which are places where people can discuss things that can't normally be discussed at the dinner table. You can find adult content, morbid true crime, and a laundry list of weird things. Among these not safe for work groups, there's one genre of subreddit that is more dangerous and more heartbreaking than any other. The ones that discuss drugs. r/currently tripping, r/Adderall, r/cannabis are all thriving communities, but we're not talking about them today. We're talking about r/DPH. Take one look at this subreddit and you'll find hundreds of users enjoying their high and hundreds of users who desperately need help. The main purpose of this community is to talk about their recreational drug use. And sometimes users do post simple, even lighthearted experiences on there. Scrolling through DPH, I saw one post from someone who shares that they started hearing voices while high, and swore the voice was singing Bohemian Rhapsody. Sounds fun. Nothing out of the ordinary for someone that's on drugs. But not all posts are like that. In fact, most aren't. Scrolling through r/DPH is like sitting in a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. It's one post after another. Someone who's gone too far, is spiraling into addiction, and doesn't know how to stop. What makes it even more heartbreaking is that they're all addicted to Benadryl. DPH is an antihistamine that is an active ingredient in Benadryl. It works great for allergies, the common cold, and even as a sleep aid. But if taken in ridiculously high amounts, you can get high and hallucinate off it. Think of it sort of like LSD, but cheaper and more accessible. Although it's horrifically dangerous, but we'll get into the dangers later on. And this is where it all begins for user tired of people faking it too. His story begins in January of 2020. His post reads as follows. I'm curious as to how y'all found out about DPH, why you started using it recreationally, and how it affected your life, both negatively and or positively. I know your experiences will be subjective and personal only to you, but I'm still curious. I first found out about DPH on January 20th, 2019 after smoking marijuana with a couple of my friends the previous night. We'd been talking about getting some LSD, shrooms, and other hallucinogens, but I had never tried those drugs, and I honestly didn't have the money at the time to buy them. So instead, I went searching on Google for cheap and legal substances that I could take as a substitute hallucinogenic. I found a website with like 10 different legal types of substances that I could buy to hallucinate on. but unfortunately, the one that caught my attention the most was DPH. I went farther on the internet to research in depth about the long-term and short-term side effects of abusing DPH, the physical symptoms of a DPH overdose, and various people's trip experiences on different amounts of DPH, where to buy a large quantity of the cheapest off-brand Benadryl, and looked at several drug/alcohol interactions with DPH. I did not end up taking Benadryl until February 15th, 2019. My first trip was on a lot of DPH, and it was horrible, honestly. I wasn't smart about it at all. I remember taking it with 6 cans of beer around 11 p.m. under some random highway. I remember walking aimlessly around town, kept falling, kept slurring my speech, and ended up asking the local PD to drive me to the ER. It was pretty stupid of me. But anyways, since February 15th, I've probably ingested over 1,000 pills of Benadryl, and my tolerance has gotten extremely high to where it at least takes 32 pills to get me even a little high. So basically, that's a very brief summary of how I got this way. You can ask me questions about my experience here, and I'll answer y'all if you want any more details. Already, it's clear. OP is in deep. Way too deep. And now, let's get our facts straight. The maximum amount of Benadryl that should be taken within a day is 300 milligrams. That's the max, and that's 6 pills. OP is taking at least 32 pills at a time, and doing that frequently for a year? It's not recommended to even take the max dosage for an extended period of time. Benadryl is not a long-term medication. So, what happens if you take more than you're supposed to? What happens if you use it for months or years at a time? Well, serious heart problems, seizures, coma, or death. And you can also develop dementia and Alzheimer's and other sorts of memory problems. So nothing good. But sadly, like a lot of people struggling with addiction, those consequences aren't enough to get one to stop. And from the first post, it doesn't seem like the OP realizes how deep he is, and it was about to get worse. So much worse. He makes a second post. I just took a few thousand mgs of DPH. It probably wasn't the best idea to take 90 pills. And commenters were worried. Someone says, "My God, my guess is that you're going to be completely lose your mind for about 24 hours. See and experience some of the worst and most frightening things anyone has ever experienced. Feel like absolute shit for about a week, have memory problems for about 2 weeks, but ultimately come out the other side. Never ever do this again. LOL." And I didn't cover this earlier, but if you're not familiar, when you hallucinate on Benadryl, you don't get this euphoric high that you sometimes get on psilocybin mushrooms or LSD. You see people, animals, or insects that aren't there, like spiders or shadow people and strangers in the room. You hear voices or sounds, and they aren't there, and you believe ordinary objects are something else, like text messages that aren't on your phone or TV shows playing when the TV is off. And also you have intense confusion and memory gaps, and people often don't realize they're hallucinating. It causes severe anxiety or paranoia, and physical effects like dry mouth, eyes, overheating, racing heart, tremors, and urinary retention. So basically, you just enter a nightmare state for a few hours to a few days. So I don't even know why anyone wants to do this anyways, but the dosage, the 90 pills that the OP took, is not one people always survive or make it out the other side without long-lasting side effects. And the commenters think he's dead or in the hospital. But then the OP follows up one day later, saying, "Haha, sorry for leaving y'all hanging for a day. I don't really remember much of what happened in the past 48 hours. All I can definitively say is that I had 5 seizures. I set up a room video camera to monitor me to see if I had any seizures. I didn't sleep. I ran a fever of 104 degrees, which didn't break until a couple hours ago. I wasn't able to keep any food or drink down, so I'm like really parched, LOL. I fainted twice at my college, and now I have a severe headache/hangover from that big dose. Again, I'm sorry for worrying y'all. I don't even remember posting that I had taken 90 pills, so I must have posted it when I was blacked out." This is absolutely heartbreaking. It's gotten to be too much for him. Benadryl has completely taken over his life. I mean, 90 pills? OP is now completely dependent upon it. He can't properly go to school or work. He's not sleeping. And then a day later, another post titled, "Currently have ingested a few thousand more milligrams and will be ingesting 9,000 mgs tomorrow afternoon." Do you ever just break down and cry? Do you ever just realize your life has no purpose and you don't care if you die? Do you ever just want your loved ones to not worry, so when they ask you if you're okay, you lie? I've been so angry with the world and myself and everyone in it. I hate that I'm so mad all the time, because I'm usually a very kind, patient, and compassionate person. This uncontrollable rage has been building up inside my mind for the past several days, and it terrifies me thinking about what damage I'm capable of doing. I need it to stop. I need everything to stop. I can't do this anymore. I'm so alone, and I don't want to be here. P.S. I know that there's a high chance of me surviving this, but I'm posting this just in case I succeed. If you're new to the subreddit and have never tried Benadryl, I strongly urge you to leave this hell site before you're sucked into this endless black hole of terror, pain, and confusion. And the commenters become incredibly concerned for the OP. They wanted to help him, but because his account is anonymous, there's nothing they can do. Someone in the comments says, "It will be a miserable, excruciating, unbearable death. Please do not do it. Life is terrible, the world is frustrating, and the people in it are horrible. I promise you, if you wait it out, things will get better." I'm not just saying that either. It took multiple ODs, S-word attempts. God, for months I was praying for God to kill me every day and night. Eventually, when you get sober, when you start to get healthy, make one last effort to have a good life, the pain goes away and you're stronger because of it. I know you think you have nothing left, because that's how I felt a year ago. But you're wrong. Make an effort to be healthy. Start working out. Say yes to anything, positive of course, and to any interesting experience somebody offers you. Even ask for help if you're comfortable with it. If you push yourself, give life just one last chance. You'll be so happy because of it. Don't give up. It takes months of actively trying to change, but I promise, seriously promise, it will get better. Please message me if you'd like to talk. We could share some war stories and experiences, or talk about whatever you'd like. I'd be happy to help, friend. And everyone in the comments just wants to help the OP. In another comment, Tired of People Faking It Too writes, "Well, I do want to stop, but I don't want to stop taking DPH until I can find an alternative method to cope with my life, because I take Benadryl to cope with my pain and stress and worries. I have complex PTSD from several traumatic events from my childhood. My parents died when I was very, very young. I was assaulted by people I trusted. I've had horrible experiences in the hospital, and a bunch more. I get panic attacks, disassociate, and have meltdowns when I get flashbacks or night terrors. I'm not very good at coping with it, so I take pills. I'm just a messed up person." And then in August of 2020, he posted a clip from Supernatural, a clip that shows a character who can't seem to remember their own name. They stutter over their words, unable to form a complete sentence. Tired of People Faking Too says, "Short-term memory loss sucks, but that's what happens when you get addicted to Benadryl and abuse it for too long." By the way, this short clip is from Supernatural, and it's basically how I act on a daily basis when I'm delirious on DPH. Watching this unfold, watching this user fall to pieces is just so devastating. And like I said, the commenters tried to help, but there's really not much anyone could do. They commented links to resources, provided support, let them know they were listening, but Tired of People Faking Too never found a way to cope. And on September 22nd, 2020, he made his last post. 276 pills. Why the hell not? Just 1 year before, he was taking 32 pills at once. And a year and a half later, he's taking 276 pills. That's 4,500% more than the maximum recommended dose. Around 2,700 milligrams of DPH is considered an overdose. This is well beyond that threshold. Even the most experienced drug users don't ever consider taking that much. And the sad reality is, Tired of People Faking It wasn't trying to get high anymore. On October 21st, 2020, r/dead Redditors posted, "I am saddened to report that Tired of People Faking 2 has passed away at 20 years old after a lengthy battle with DPH addiction. In the afternoon hours of September 22nd, 2020, Tired of People Faking 2 is believed to have committed S-word via an intentional OD of DPH. The average person will better recognize DPH under the brand name Benadryl. Benadryl is an over-the-counter drug which is commonly used at therapeutic doses as an antihistamine or sleep aid. At recreational doses, DPH notoriously induces a state of delirium, and users will experience realistic and oftentimes disturbing visual and auditory hallucinations. Most chronic DPH abusers, including Tired of People Faking 2 himself, report that they find the DPH high to be extremely dysphoric and unenjoyable, but still an overwhelming compulsion to continue to abuse DPH. The reason for this counterintuitive response is not medically understood. Due to low cost and ease of access, DPH abuse is a growing problem around the world. Recent social media trends, such as TikTok's Benadryl challenge, have only exacerbated this issue, particularly among young teens. I cannot stress enough just how bad DPH abuse is for the human brain. Do not be fooled by its unassuming over-the-counter status. In my opinion, chronic DPH addiction is on a comparable level of seriousness to addictions to hard drugs such as H or crystal. Chronic use, especially at higher doses, is linked to a myriad of negative physical and psychological effects, including heart issues, memory issues, partial vision/hearing loss, loss of motor function, depression, S-word ideation, brain fog, persisting hallucinations, and much, much more. Recovering addicts will still experience these symptoms, in addition to unbearable psychological withdrawal symptoms, for months or even years after stopping all drug use. Due to its relative obscurity, organized research on DPH abuse is extremely limited. But anecdotal reports suggest that some physical and psychological damage may be permanent. As difficult as the recovery process may be, death via DPH OD is a notoriously horrible way to die. Out of respect for Tired of People Faking 2, I will not go into detail in this post about what these ODs are like. Suffice to say, I hope this individual has finally found peace. I'm honestly quite sad how many new people, especially teens, are taking this drug recreationally. I don't want anyone else to have an experience of pure agony, terror, and confusion that the DPH has caused me. I want to add that I did not personally know the individual behind Tired of People Faking 2, and as such, I do not have conclusive proof of death. My presumption of death is based on Tired of People Faking 2's proclamation of active intent to unalive himself in his final 2 comments, as well as 2 posts where he claims that he's preparing to take 267 Benadryl pills, equivalent to 7 grams of diphenhydramine. This amount of DPH, a quantity apparently taken by Tired of People Faking 2, is a lethal dose. Also, I'm aware that accounts featured here are usually supposed to be at least a year old, but I'd like to request an exception on the basis that the account is approaching 1 year old and was extremely active up until the user's death. I believe Tired of People Faking 2 is deserving of a memorial on this page. Deserving that he is. Addiction is a thief, stealing everything that makes life worth living, taking away families, jobs, any opportunity to live a happy life. There's a stigma around it that has people believe addicts are just bums, lazy, selfish, and the way their life has turned out is all their fault. But no one wants to live like this. No one wants to watch themselves die slowly over time, watching their friends and family live life without them, knowing their addiction is hurting everyone around them. Being addicted to something eats away at a person, and without help, that person will die. It's a sin that Tired of People Faking 2 never got a chance to get that help. Never had a chance to make it out. But that last commenter couldn't have said it better. And I hope he's now at peace. Lady Iris and more snow. My productivity app keeps logging things I never did. Written by salty_astronaut77. I shouldn't have been awake when I found it. It was 2:14 a.m. and I just spent an hour scrolling mindlessly, promising myself again that I'd finally fixed my sleep schedule. That's when I saw the ad. Boost your focus. Track your life. Never lose a single minute. The app was called Chronicle, and something about its slogan hooked me. I tried a million so-called productivity hacks before. Time blocking, bullet journaling, those planners with cute stickers. None of them ever worked. But this app promised something different. It claimed it could track my schedule automatically, even when I wasn't logging anything. It said it knew what I was doing even if I didn't tell it. It sounded too good to be true, but at 2 a.m., half delirious, I downloaded it anyways. It opened to a sleek black screen with a single glowing question. Do you agree to let Chronicle monitor your activities? I tapped yes. At first, it was amazing. When I woke up the next morning, Chronicle had already built a timeline. 7:48 to 8:16 a.m. Showering. 8:16 to 8:34 a.m. Making coffee. 8:34 to 9:42 a.m. Scrolling TikTok. It was eerily precise. I hadn't entered anything. Yet somehow it knew exactly when I stepped into the shower, how long I stayed in the kitchen, even the black hole of wasted TikTok time. The strangest part? I felt comforted, as if I wasn't drifting anymore, as if my life was being watched, recorded. Even the meaningless in-between moments suddenly felt like they had weight. I started using it obsessively over the next few days. Chronicle filled my life with crisp little entries, and for the first time in years, I felt like maybe I wasn't wasting anything. Then came the first anomaly. Thursday night. I woke up groggy, throat dry, and reached for my phone. Chronicle had already logged the night. 11:42 p.m. to 1:11 a.m. sleeping. 1:11 to 2:07 a.m. standing outside neighbor's window. 2:07 to 6:44 a.m. sleeping. I blinked at the screen. Standing outside my neighbor's window? My neighbor, Claire, is an older woman. We barely speak. Why the hell would I be standing outside her window at 1 in the morning? I laughed nervously and assumed it was a glitch. Maybe Chronicle had misread something, like me getting up for water. I almost deleted the app right then, but some dark, gnawing curiosity kept my finger from pressing uninstall. Instead, I decided to test it. The next night, I stayed awake on purpose. I sat at my desk with a Red Bull, Netflix playing softly in the background, making sure not to move. Around 2 a.m., I finally checked Chronicle. 12:07 to 1:59 a.m. Watching Netflix at desk. 1:59 to 2:41 a.m. Standing outside neighbor's window. My stomach turned. I hadn't moved. I hadn't even gone near my front door, but Chronicle insisted I'd spent 42 minutes outside Claire's window. I locked the door, closed all the blinds, tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid. Monday morning, Claire was waiting for me in the hallway. "You were out late last night, weren't you?" she asked, frowning. "No," I said, my heart pounding, because I could have sworn. She trailed off, shaking her head. "Never mind, I'm sorry." She shuffled back into her apartment, but the way she looked at me made my skin crawl. I opened Chronicle again. The entry was still there. Black text on a white background carved into reality. 1:59 to 2:41 a.m. Standing outside neighbor's window. After that, the logs only got stranger. Saturday, 3:12 to 3:47 a.m. Digging behind communal trash bins. Sunday, 2:23 to 3:02 a.m. Watching someone sleep. It didn't even say who, just someone. Every time the memory was gone, I'd been asleep or awake in my apartment the whole time. But Chronicle logged those missing hours with unnerving precision. I tried recording myself at night with my phone's camera. The footage showed me sound asleep in bed the entire time. No movement, no interruptions, and yet when I checked Chronicle, 1:44 to 2:19 a.m., standing on the edge of the highway overpass. I stopped sleeping. I stayed awake until my vision blurred, terrified that if I closed my eyes, I'd wake up to another entry. Another life I didn't remember living. My skin went pale, my eyes bloodshot. Coffee didn't help, neither did alcohol. But Chronicle never stopped. It filled my nights with horrors I couldn't explain. 2:01 to 2:53 a.m. Kneeling in the park, whispering. 3:17 to 4:02 a.m. Scratching the locked basement door. 1:36 to 2:11 a.m. Standing motionless at the intersection, watching cars pass. I showed the app to my friends, desperate for reassurance. Most of them thought I'd been duped, that Chronicle was some elaborate ARG or viral marketing stunt. But when they tried to download it, it was gone from the App Store. One night, I made a mistake. I decided to confront it. If the app said I was outside Claire's window again, I'd go there myself, prove it was fake. So when Chronicle logged the entry 1:58 to 2:41 a.m., standing at neighbor's window, I grabbed my coat and ran downstairs. The night air was cold, the apartment complex silent. I crept toward Claire's window, heart hammering. Her curtains were drawn tight, but inside I could see the faint glow of her TV. And then, as I stood there, my phone buzzed. A new entry appeared. 2:12 to 2:13 a.m. Watching yourself. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head. Across the parking lot, in the shadow of the dumpsters, a figure stood. Tall, motionless, my shape. It didn't move, just stood there, holding a glowing rectangle in its hand. My phone buzzed again. 2:13 to 2:14 a.m., smiling. The figure's face split into a smile I could feel in my bones. Too wide, too knowing. I ran back inside, locked the door, and didn't come out until sunrise. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've tried everything. Deleting Chronicle, factory resetting my phone, buying a new one. Nothing works. The app always comes back. No icon, no sign of installation, just there, waiting. The next time I unlock my screen. And the entries keep getting worse. 3:01 to 3:44 a.m. Practicing with the knife. 4:11 to 4:59 a.m. Standing at the bedroom door, watching yourself sleep. 2:22 to 2:58 a.m. Digging again. Almost ready. Almost ready for what? I don't know how much longer I can take this. I've stopped eating. I don't leave the apartment. My friends stopped checking on me after I scared them with my rambling. But tonight was different. Chronicle log something I can't ignore. 1:44 to 2:13 a.m. Writing confession. 2:13 to present. Posting on Reddit. And as I type these words, my phone buzzes again. One last entry slides into place with the inevitability of a headstone. 2:14 to the end. Becoming permanent. After that, you'd think we'd dial it down a bit, but let's be real. You're not here for light stories, are you? This next one's about a user who claimed to have killed someone and decided to share the whole thing on Reddit. 10 years ago, someone posted a thread on r/askreddit. Serious. Redditors who have killed someone in self-defense. Did you ever recover psychologically? What is it like to live knowing you killed someone regardless you didn't want to do it? On this specific thread, a user named TA_aimtrue decided to share his story, which gets really dark. This is so late that I don't know if it will be seen, but I'll post it anyway. Also using a throwaway because the victim is another Redditor who could be identified through my normal ID. Back in 1995, I lived in a quiet neighborhood in the San Francisco East Bay with my wife of a few years and our 20-month-old daughter. We had a small 3-bedroom, 2-story house, and one of our second-floor bedrooms doubled as my home office. One quiet Saturday morning, I was in my office playing Command & Conquer on my computer with my headphones on, oblivious to the sounds of the outside world. I'd probably been playing for an hour or so when, during one particularly quiet moment, I faintly heard my wife cry out downstairs. Knowing that she was down there with our daughter, I pulled my headphones off to see if she needed help with anything. Until the day I take my last breath, I'll never forget what I heard when I pulled them off. I heard the voice of a man with a thick Mexican accent shout, "Quit yelling, bitch, or I'll fucking cut your head off and fuck your fucking daughter." My daughter was crying hysterically. After that, it was like some switch was thrown in me and my higher brain just shut off. I wasn't making decisions, I just acted. I don't even remember pulling the .45 from the lockbox in my desk. I just remember walking down the stairs slowly, scared as hell that I was going to see my wife dead when I reached the bottom. Instead, when I reached the bottom, I saw my wife half naked, bent over the couch, bleeding from somewhere in her upper body, while being raped from behind by some burly guy with a knife in his hand. He wasn't trying to rape her. He was in the middle of the deed and was probably nearing climax. I never said a word to the guy. Not while I was upstairs, not while I was coming down the stairs, and not when I walked into the room. His back was to me, so he had no idea I was even standing there. He was holding his knife in his right hand, so that was the arm I grabbed with my left when I pulled him off. He spun away from her and me with a confused look on his face, and I shot him square in the chest at nearly point-blank range before he had a chance to say a single word. His face went pale as he went onto one knee, and I fired twice more. One hit his neck, and the second missed entirely. I was told later that the first shot was the fatal one. What happened next was always been a point of shame for me. The only thought going through my head at that point was that I couldn't let my daughter watch this man die. Without even checking on my wife, I scooped my daughter up and walked out my front door. As I walked to my driveway, I saw one of my neighbors standing there staring at my house. He'd heard the gunshots. The poor guy went pale when he saw me walk out, and I vaguely remember asking him to hold my daughter while I went in and checked on my wife. The neighbor asked me if I'd shot her, and I told him, no, I shot the man who was raping her. I didn't realize at the time I had the guy's blood spray covering half my body, and that I looked like something out of a horror movie. I then handed him my daughter and my gun. I also have no idea why I gave him my gun, and went back into my house to help my wife. Now, to be fair, this was clearly self-defense. The guy was holding a knife, threatening to kill his wife and daughter. What else was he supposed to do? But the police didn't see it that way. The police and DA gave me some flack about the exact circumstances of the shooting. One of the detectives told me that it was more of an execution than a defense, but in the end they declined to pursue any charges. The man who attacked her turned out to be a guy with serious mental issues who had previously convicted of 2 violent rapes, one of which was against a 9-year-old girl. Under California's then new 3 strikes law, he'd have gone to prison for life if I hadn't killed him. As for recovery, I like to think that I've recovered from it, but it certainly induced a few behavioral changes. To this day, for example, I can't wear headphones that block out background noise. Even after years of counseling, over-ear and noise-canceling headphones give me panic attacks because I can't hear what's happening around me. I found out later that he'd been raping my wife for nearly 10 minutes before I heard him, and that he'd actually told my wife 3 times that he was going to rape my daughter. When he was finished with her, I was sitting 30 feet away and had no idea what was going on, and that fact has fucked with me for years. My wife had a much worse time of it though. In addition to 2 stab wounds to her shoulder and upper arm, and the bruising and injuries from the forceful rape, she ended up having a mental break and took years to fully recover. For the first 6 months, she absolutely could never be in a room by herself. For more than a year, she couldn't be in a house by herself, and she never re-entered the house where this happened. For several years, she'd break out in a sweat when she heard men with deep Hispanic accents talking, because she'd hear his voice again. Even now, decades later, she starts shaking if you try to talk to her about it. She's fine in every other sense, but even discussing it freaks her out. I fucked up that day. I was being too honest with the cops. We've all heard lawyers say that you shouldn't talk to the police about a crime without a lawyer present, and that day I learned why. When I shot the guy in his chest and went to his knee, his whole body was going limp and he dropped the knife. As I learned later, fragments from the first shot had shredded one of his lungs and aorta, and his body was already shutting down. I relayed every detail of the shooting to the police and detectives, who nodded politely until I was done. Then one of them looked at me and said, "So, the guy was on his knee, unarmed and wounded, when you shot him the second and third time?" The implication of that question pissed me off. I said a few things I shouldn't have, and everything quickly went downhill from there. By the time it got relayed to the DA's office, the story had a white vigilante executes minority rights vibe. The whole thing went away pretty quickly once his background was revealed, and the autopsy showed that the first shot, which was indisputably self-defense, was the fatal one. In the end, the autopsy showed that he was a dead man after the first shot, so my behavior with the last 2 was largely irrelevant. If that first shot had not been fatal, and the next shot had been, it severed his artery, but was deemed potentially survivable in the autopsy report, my story could have been a very different ending. As for my daughter, she had no effects from it whatsoever. She was so young that she doesn't even remember it, and her view was obscured enough that it didn't seem to cause any trauma. We did take her to see a child psychologist for a while after it happened just to make sure she was okay, but she was given a clean bill of health pretty quickly. The only real impact on her, if any, was my wife's intense paranoia about her safety around strangers for many years. My wife had become convinced that she was going to die, and that this guy was going to kill her baby because she couldn't protect her. It took my wife a long time to get over that, and as a result, my daughter grew up with a bit of a stranger danger complex. She was fine by the time she hit her teens, but as a little girl, she'd run from my wife whenever anyone she didn't know approached her. That it wasn't caused by the rape itself, but by my wife's entirely understandable reaction afterward. My girlfriend of 1 year broke up with me after my head injury. 7 months later, I found out why. By May of Tay. Earlier this year, my ex-girlfriend, Alexandra, broke up with me for reasons that she still hasn't told me herself. The weeks before the breakup are a blur to me. I'd sustained a head injury with no memory of how, and I suspect that's the reason I can't recall anything I'd supposedly done/said to her. Alex and I had both known each other since secondary school, but only became a couple during our first year of university. We're now on our second year, and our accommodations are about 20 minutes apart. 3 days ago, Alex's diary came to me in the mail. Presumably, she's the one who sent it to me, but I have no way of knowing. Upon reading the entries from the dates I have no memory of, I had an unshakable feeling of terror, one that hasn't left me since. Some additional context needed for the story. Bunny Bunny was an infamous Facebook group back in 2022 in which members would post oversaturated pictures of school kids, predominantly male, along with a rating out of 5 carats. This was often accompanied by an unsettling caption like unique taste or beautiful mouth. The group began to circulate around most schools in my area, and it was all anyone could talk about. The leading theory among students was that local predators were using the group to rate potential victims, but there was never any evidence to support this. The group was promptly banned from Facebook after the parents of each child featured had discovered the posts. After the incident, and a few dozen complaints to my school, we were forbidden from talking about it again out of respect for the students involved. Below are extracts from the diary that I've shortened to include only the parts about me during the days leading up to our breakup. Tuesday, 7th of January. Daniel was ignoring me all day. He usually sends me a cute message every morning to start the day on a good note, but today he didn't message me until about 5 p.m. When he finally responded, he asked if I wanted to come over, and I enthusiastically said yes. But when I arrived, his behavior was unusual. He gave me an odd smile and appeared to be acting shy around me, glaring at me like he was starstruck. I thought it was cute and assumed he just thought I looked really pretty that day. There was also a noticeable bruise on the left side of his forehead, which was worrying me, but he was dismissive whenever I mentioned it. It's nothing. Stop worrying. I decided to drop it because he was visibly annoyed by my comments, and I was afraid I'd embarrassed him. Friday, 10th of January. Daniel's behavior is becoming concerning. He isn't attending his lectures like he normally does, and he keeps forgetting basic things like where he's left his keys, dates we have planned, passwords for his emails, etc. And there's this awful smell coming from his bed. He's also picked up weird habits, ones that he's never showed signs of having before. Habits such as licking his lips whenever he sees me, smelling my hair, squeezing me tighter than he usually would whenever we embrace, and barely blinking. I think the worst of it, though, is the obvious decline in his hygiene. He isn't showering or brushing his teeth unless I bring it up, and I have to practically force him to. We share the same skincare products, and it's blatantly obvious that he's neglecting them. Monday, 13th of January. Last night, I went to Daniel's accommodation after my lecture, and he was even more disheveled than he has been for the past few days. His eyes were bloodshot, and his breathing was very apparent. It almost sounded as though he was running out of air. I asked him if he was feeling okay, and he practically lunged at me and started aggressively making out with me. This caught me by surprise, so I pushed him away as hard as I could, but still, he kept trying to climb on top of me. I yelled, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" And that seemed to snap him out of it. But periodically throughout the rest of the day, he kept trying to convince me to sleep with him. As the night grew darker, Daniel became more frustrated. Whenever I dared to shut down his creepy advances, he'd just stare at me like a wild animal. Honestly, it was beginning to creep me out. He had this expressionless look on his face. He wasn't blinking, and his eyes were even starting to well up with tears. I went to go brush my teeth to get away from the situation, but when I came back a few minutes later, he was completely knocked out, like he'd already been asleep for hours. I realized his eyes were probably so bloodshot due to exhaustion, and fortunately for me, the sleep had finally caught up to him. Relieved, I grabbed my phone and immediately called an Uber, so I didn't have to walk back to my accommodation alone. But right after making the payment, I saw something moving in the lower corner of my eye. I quickly shifted my gaze downwards and saw a person's hand, slowly creeping its way out from underneath Daniel's bed. There's no words to describe the fear I felt in this moment. I was stood, paralyzed, whilst this middle-aged man started emerging from below my boyfriend's unconscious body. The man was slightly overweight, balding, and he looked like a week-old corpse. After he stood upright, we locked eyes for a moment, and his mouth twisted into the most horrific smile I've ever seen before, uttering the words, "Thank you." At that moment, I snapped out of whatever petrified trance I was in, screamed as loud as I could, and ran straight out of the building without wasting any time to grab any of my possessions. Tuesday, 16th of January. I've been staying at my parents' house for the past 3 days, just trying to wrap my head around the whole Daniel situation. He's gone back to sending me good morning texts like nothing's happened, and he claims to have no idea who the man under his bed was. What I would want to know is why he said thank you. Was he recording us? Was Daniel aware of this and getting paid to fulfill that man's perverted fantasy of spying on a 19-year-old girl? Maybe that's why he was so determined to have S-word with me all day, and why he got mad when I kept refusing. I think I'm just going to cut him out of my life because this whole situation has tainted the way that I see him. Friday 17th of January. This morning, I received an email from a former classmate at my old school with a link attached. The link was for a Facebook group called Rabbit Rabbit. I clicked the link out of curiosity and wasn't at all prepared for what I was about to see. The group was Bunny Bunny in everything but name. Hundreds of posts of children and teens being rated with carrots. These creeps had been active and posting this whole time, at least 2 posts a day for the last year. My anger was short-lived though, and quickly turned into horror when I scrolled down and was greeted by a familiar face on a post from Tuesday the 14th. The profile picture of the user who posted it was the same twisted smile I saw back in Daniel's room. It was the man under his bed. His username was Elmer Fudd, and to my utter shock, he'd posted an oversaturated selfie of Daniel with 5 carrot emojis across his forehead. The caption read, "Comfortable skin. End of diary extracts." I checked the selfie used in the Rabbit Rabbit post, which is surprisingly still up, and I don't remember taking it. I thought Alex was lying when she asked me about a so-called man who crawled out from under the bed. I hope somebody here can make sense of all of this, but I think it's best I try not to contact her anymore. This is a relatively old story that my dad has told me a few times over the years, but with Halloween coming up, it's been on my mind again. I myself have never been able to witness the house through the description I've been given by multiple men 20-something years after seeing it gave me a very vivid mental image. To begin with, I would like to mention that my father is a highly religious man, a preacher's son, and does not believe in ghosts or anything paranormal in the slightest. Nothing seems to spook him either, but he swears up and down that he felt something unnatural that scared the shit out of him, even just from mentioning the story to me on the rare occasion that he would bring it up. Back in the late 80s, he and a few friends would regularly hike over the waterfall or creek bed behind our farm and would follow the trails up until they eventually met the frontage road off of the interstate. Well, one night they decided to take a different route to go around the backside of another farmer's land, mostly to see the animals because they owned emus and other large pets that weren't common in the local area. Supposedly, after leaving the area and continuing into the woods at night of all wonderful times, they managed to stumble upon what is described by all 5 men 20 years later as a Blair Witch look-alike house. It was a very, very old home, and my dad claims that just looking at him gave him this ominous feeling. But of course, they had to go inside and check it out. Inside the house was a vintage cottage-style home that was probably built in the late 40s or early 50s, and the group was instantly met with writings and symbols in strange Latin-like languages, with a few English graffiti pieces that quoted a supposed satanic or pagan worshipping ritual, with certain pieces describing how to sacrifice a human soul to some, supposedly demonic deity. My father still claims to this day that certain symbols were painted on the walls in blood, while others were clearly spray painted, and I find it easier to believe because he also worked as a firefighter for years before this happened and had a lot of experience with having to see human blood and dismembered bodies on the freeway after car accidents. Past a small living or kitchen area was a stairwell that was so small that their shoulders would physically brush either side of the wall as they went up, and the stairs went straight. Stopped at a small landing, then turned right, so as you started up, you could not see what might be standing at the top. At the top of the stairs, a door led to a large attic-styled bedroom where actual chain manacles and locks hung from one of the walls near a circular window at the end of the room, which was also completely covered in weird symbols, graffiti, and now more obvious and frightening, large, dried puddles of blood that had seeped into the floors and walls. Allegedly, once they were upstairs investigating the room, they swear that they heard someone moving up the stairwell behind them quickly, but as they looked back, there was no one there. Everyone essentially told me that it almost sounded like heels clacking on wood, and now, completely spooked, they rushed back down the stairs to see if someone was playing a prank on them and was hiding downstairs. Surprise, surprise, they found nothing and no new footprints in the dust and grime that differed from the ones they left on their way in. To keep things interesting, I met with each of one of the guys separately to ask them about what they remembered, expecting to maybe find a crack or something to prove that maybe they were exaggerating, but when I asked them, I got the same answer from each of them with no hesitation. They got the same details right down to the minute that they entered the house and the minute they left. But here's what it gets really strange. They left the house and for some unknown reason decided to try walking back from a different route, using a compass to approach from the east instead of the south. They did this test more than 10 times that night, walking from every possible route or direction, yet they always come at the front entrance of the house, even when the compass and common knowledge of the area showed that it was physically impossible to be at the south end of the house when they moved in a straight line from the north, east, or west. There probably is some scientific explanation for it, but I haven't found one yet. These guys know these woods literally like the back of their hand and still do to this day. The final time that these guys came back and found themselves standing at the front door of the house, they began to feel physically ill, verging on feverish, and finally decided that it's time to give up when one of them nearly faints, and as they turn to leave, the man who nearly fainted turns, looks up, and points at the circular window at the front of the house on the second story. Everyone looks and immediately sees a tall female figure hunched over, standing in the window watching them. Though they see no features on her face other than two large dark colored eyes, and it's sort of shuffled in place, slight before turning and walking away as if it were heading down the stairs at the end of the room. At the sight of the figure actually moving, they all took off running through the woods, ending up on the side of the interstate about 3 miles from my dad's house, where they originally started from. They eventually made it back to my dad's place, though they claimed that they felt as if someone were following them the entire way, and my dad's cousin gets up to get some water from the kitchen, only to be announced that he swore that he saw the same figure standing outside the kitchen window near the edge of the woods, close to the woodshed. Thankfully, nothing ever came from the experience other than the collective state of absolute terror when the subject is brought up. They wrote off what his cousin saw as paranoia or pareidolia, though 5 years later they decided to return to see if the house was still standing. Miraculously, it had fallen in on itself and was nothing more than a pile of rubble, and they never went back. I always joked with my dad and would ask him what he would do if he went back and found the house standing the same way it had been back then, trying to give him a reason to let me go and see the place for myself. But with trespassing laws being far more prevalent in today's times, it would be nearly impossible without either getting shot or going to jail, as it was not on our property. I don't know. It always gives me the creeps thinking about it. But I never considered the story to be true until I did this little mock interview with all the guys. And when I say that these grown men are scared to death by the story, I mean it. Seeing them get physically worked up and frightened by just telling the story really caused me to be less of a skeptic. What do you guys think? Could it possible that they were just spooked and it caused them to see these things? Weird things are happening to me. 22 female. Not sure if it's an elaborate prank or if I'm seriously mentally ill. Originally posted on November 24th, 2015, and the post reads as follows. Okay. I've never, ever felt the need to post here, but I feel like I'm losing my mind. I don't even know where to start. My mind is so jumbled. I guess it started 2 weeks ago at work. I work in a factory, but I don't do the labor. I'm more of a spreadsheet maker / book balancer / secretary type thing. Really informal, but it's my uncle's company and I needed a job. Yada, yada, yada. Good pay. I was sitting at my desk with nothing to do, and I hear my boss, not my uncle, just another coworker and a friend of his, go, "Phil sighs" as he looks at the weather. I look up like, huh? And he looks at me like, huh? He didn't say anything. I was like, that's weird, but oh well, anyway. And then the next day, I was talking to some coworkers on the floor, asking them work stuff. And one of them called me a bitch, but when I called him out, him and everyone else looked at me like I was insane. I apologized and we all laughed it off. Factory is loud, right? People mishear things all the time. Except I was at Walmart. I know, class. And one of the workers there was putting away stock, and I swear to God, he looked straight at me and said, "The chicken was just killed." But I asked him what he meant, And I felt so bad because he looked so confused and like I was crazy. He hadn't even opened his mouth apparently. Shit like this has been happening so much. My friend even pulled me aside to ask if I was feeling okay. Small things are happening too. My boyfriend says he's making salmon for dinner. I hear him preparing salmon. I smell salmon. Then he brings it out and it's lasagna. I asked him where the salmon was and he was like, "What?" I said lasagna tonight and brushed it off like I'm being silly. I could have sworn this was one shirt I owned was green and not teal. Shit is changing and people are saying stuff, but they're not. People are narrating their lives sometimes. There's no way my friends could be pranking me. Not when random people on the street are doing this too. I'm so scared. I don't want to be thrown in a mental hospital. Not trying to offend mentally ill people, I'm so scared. I feel like my mind is slowly melting. And then some top comments on this post read as follows. Someone says, "You should go to the doctor. Not just because there might be a physical or mental issue going on, but that needs to be addressed. But also so you can get an answer of what is going on. Don't keep yourself in limbo. That will drive you insane. Doctors aren't your enemy. And even if there's a mental issue going on, that doesn't automatically mean you get thrown into a mental hospital just like that. You've probably been around more people with mental disorders than you realize, and the vast majority of them can live a relatively normal life and live independently with some medical and or psychiatric help. Go to the doctor. They are the professionals here." And then the OP responded saying, "Thank you. I'm in Canada, and I made an appointment with my doctor. It'll be a week before I see her though. I can't believe how much this blew up. It happened again last night. Boyfriend said he was going to the bar. I shower and come out and ask why he's still here. Because I live here? I thought you were going to the bar. No? Maybe I'll go to the ER if this keeps happening." Another commenter said, "Not to terrify OP, but this happened to my mother as well, and it was a brain tumor for her. This seriously calls for a doctor as soon as possible." Another commenter said, "Yep, sounds pretty similar to a friend. Go get it checked. It's scary. But my friend, she's doing a whole lot better now." And then the OP gives us an update on November 29th, 2015, which was 5 days later. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. I never could have ever in my wildest imagination that my last post would get this much attention. I was on my boyfriend's Reddit account on his phone and actually saw my own post near the first page. I was floored. Then he saw what I was looking at, and we had a pretty awkward conversation. Basically asked me why I posted something like that. He'd read it, but only when he saw me on the page it clicked that he saw the same username on my laptop on Reddit. He never imagined it was me. I did change some details about my life in the last post. So we talked for a long time, and finally, he said that he was taking me to emergency. I didn't want to go. I just wanted to wait for my appointment, not because I didn't think it was serious, but because I had no clue how to explain what was happening to the doctors and nurses, especially for it to warrant an emergency visit. So we went, and he was very understanding. Just asked me how much I remembered from the past couple days, stuff he said, and stuff I'd apparently heard. We were both very scared. Ha ha ha. I got to the emergency. Very slowly. I live in a smallish town, but we have a giant hospital for some reason. We're close to a lot of other towns and they use our hospital. Close to Toronto too. Anyway, it was slow. Just one father and a sick kid. I went in and basically had to explain what was happening. And honestly, the nurses were like, "What the fuck, this bitch is crazy." But when I saw a doctor, he took me very, very seriously. It was very nice. He wrote down basically everything I said. I got some x-rays and they asked me questions. You know the whole spiel. Anyway, the point of this update was to tell you guys that I have a tumor. That's really scary right now. But I have a tumor in my brain. It hasn't sunken in yet that tomorrow my brain is going to be under the knife. I don't want to share more because I've gotten a lot of messages from people who are like guessing my name and where I'm from. Apparently I remind people of their friends or crazy exes. I'm scared to miss work, but my boss was more than understanding. He sort of looked at me like I was insane when I asked how long I should be out of work. I don't know, I need to pay rent. We'll figure it out. Thank you all for your love and support. I will update whenever I remember to. I am scared, but alive. And wow, what a scary update for the OP to give us. And sadly, we didn't hear back from the OP for a long, long time. People thought the worst happened, but guess what? She updated 10 years later. Update, April 18th, 2025. Am I allowed to make an update here? I don't use social media much anymore, and Reddit looks completely different than the last time I logged in. My friend sent me this basically immediately after it was posted, asking if it was me. It was so long ago. I kind of cringe seeing how I wrote it, but I'll give myself some flack because I was young and going through a terrible time. That boyfriend didn't last long. He bailed when he found out how long my recovery would be and what it entitled. I moved back in with my family, who are all nurses and caregivers, so it was really the smoothest recovery I could have had. I did years of therapy, both physical and mental. I did eventually end up losing my factory job, but that honestly wasn't their fault. Admittedly, I no-showed to work a lot and was spiraling for a few years, but I eventually landed on my feet, found my dream man, lumberjack type, sorry for being a Canadian stereotype, and his mother had gone through almost the same thing I did when she was younger, so we really bonded over that. I won't say I'm having a perfect time. Life is life. I'm child-free, have a job I tolerate, have money to spend on my friends and family, and am generally very happy. I keep off social media because I already survived a brain tumor. I'm not looking for more. And for Americans who are going to ask, yes, it was free. And wow, what an unexpected update. I mean, no one was expecting an update from the OP after 10 years, but yeah, pretty recent post just a few months ago as of the time of recording. But it's great to hear the OP made it through. And even though it was a hard recovery and therapy time, I'm super glad to hear that she's doing all right and has a great relationship with her family, boyfriend, etc. I mean, that first post was just terrifying. Her imagining her coworkers and other people just saying things to her and thinking she was going crazy. Thank God she saw a doctor because, I mean, some people would just let that keep going. They're like, I don't want to go to a psychiatric institution or a mental hospital, but this is a great kind of lesson for everybody watching. If you are going through something similar, go to a doctor. It's way better to go to a doctor, get diagnosed, get yourself figured out, than just let it happen because who knows, it could be a literal brain tumor. So if you ever are wondering why you feel weird, might as well go to the doctor. It won't hurt. It's way better to be safe than sorry. Very happy end of the post, but yeah, terrible that she had to go through it, but luckily it ended on a good note. On to the next one. Ex-boyfriend stalks OP. Husband wanted. I'm aware that this is unconventional. Believe me, I've tried conventional. It didn't end well for anyone, and I require a certain open-mindedness that I'm hoping I might find here, but more importantly, I need my future husband to know the rules. Meet cutes are well and good on the screen, but they don't guarantee a partner's ability to follow basic instructions. That was my mistake at the first time. So, begging your pardon for my bluntness, I'm going to be clear about my requirements. Please read carefully. If you can't meet them, there's no point in going any further. Must want children. At least one child anyway. I'm open to the idea of more, but one is an absolute must. Must be in it for the long haul until our child turns 18 to be precise. I understand that level of commitment is a daunting prospect, especially when we have not met yet. After our child is born, you are welcome to ignore me, if you please, or take your pleasure elsewhere, though I will warn you that it might be difficult to come by. But you will live under my roof until our child is an adult. Homebody preferred. It will make the 2 decades easier on you. Must have impeccable manners. I'll provide a manual outline, the required etiquette. But you must at least have a grasp of basic courtesy to begin with. If you let your tongue run away with you or don't bother to wish your neighbors a good morning when you pass them in the street, stop reading. This is not the opportunity for you. Seriously. This is the part where I should talk about myself, but let's face it, this is hardly a romantic proposal. I require commitment up front, and there's no guarantee that once we do meet, we'll even really like each other. If we do, fantastic. It'll help the years fly by. If we don't, you'll still have the main prize: years of free rent, expenses free living, and the Old Oak Hotel. A sanctuary has stood in this spot in one form or another since before the ley lines. During its tenure, it is flooded, put to flame, and pounded into dust. Time and time again, it has been reimagined and rebuilt. Most of the current building dates back to Victoria's reign, though the oldest parts were constructed in the 13th century. At the very bottom of the garden, cut into the surrounding hills, there's a cave bearing handprints of red ochre. There has always been an Edwards at the hotel, though of course we haven't always gone by that name. You would think a family so tied to one place would do a better job of keeping records, but no one is certain of our origins. Perhaps it was a cosmic bargain, or perhaps mere luck. Whether good or bad, I have never been able to decide. Either way, our presence is required. Throughout our spotty past, there's a story here and there of an Edwards deserting their post, and it always coincides with a particularly brutal period of history. I inherited the position 5 years ago, at midnight on my 18th birthday. My parents took their already packed suitcase and left. I don't blame them for their abandonment. I intend to do one day the same thing to my, or hopefully, our child. They send me postcards and photos from time to time, always smiling on sunny beaches. Money isn't a concern for them. That's part of whatever mysterious deal our ancestors made. When a caretaker leaves in good standing, they will never want for anything again. They could travel the world for the rest of their lives, always sleeping in the softest sheets and dining in the finest restaurants, and never find their pockets empty. Keep this point in mind, for if you can meet my requirements, you will share my good fortune. And what must we do in return? I can all but hear you scream the question. Why? Very little. The presence of Edwards ensures that the guests can't stray from the hotel grounds. Most of our guests are live-in residents, though we do get the occasional walk-in. Where they come from, I don't know, for we are not visible to most people who stumble upon our lonely corner of the world. I've come to believe the hotel chooses to reveal itself when it's lacking entertainment, or to fill a need. Jimmy, my first husband, was one such guest. For the most part, the guests are harmless. They'll give you a little fright from time to time, popping out from a wall or turning your bathwater into blood, but I find it hard to hold it against them. I found 23 years here dreary. I can't imagine how bored I'd be after 500. There are a few exceptions you should be aware of. Eric, our resident serial murderer, he claims to have been Jack the Ripper while he still drew breath, but I think he's just a blowhard. He knows better than to harm an Edwards. But I'm afraid spouses are fair game. Years ago, my grandmother managed to confine him to the 4th floor, so you will be perfectly safe from him as long as you never set foot there. Occasionally, the lift will stop on that floor even though you haven't pressed the button for it. Do not get out, even if the lift appears to be on fire or starts filling with murky water. Wait for the doors to close again, then go to another floor. It should only take a few hours. The thing in the cellar. I don't know what it is. No one ever has. We only know it eats rats and must be fed once a day. If I'm ever ill or incapacitated, this task will fall to you. Harvest the rats from the traps in the garden, then stand at the cellar door and throw them down the stairs. Do not walk down the stairs and do not forget to feed it. You don't want to be the first person to see its face. Mrs. Jones. Old-fashioned and a stickler for manners. She's the reason I'm advertising for a husband rather than a boyfriend. She won't abide a couple living in sin under the same roof as her. Really though, she's a sweet old thing. Full of stories about the war and always ready to help if I get stuck on a recipe. I don't blame her for what happens with Jimmy at all. I'd warned him enough times. Guests aside, there are other rules you will need to follow to ensure a safe, satisfactory stay at the Old Oak Hotel. They are listed in a book that has been repenned many times over the centuries. If you choose to accept this opportunity, I will insist that you read it until you can recite the pages word for word. However, there are some rules so critical for your survival that I feel compelled to list them here. With the exception of the 4th floor, you are welcome to roam the hotel and its grounds as you please, but you must never set foot outside of our land, not until our child is old enough to fulfill their duties. If I were to do so, it would unleash pandemonium, plague, peril, perhaps another world war. I'm afraid you would be less crucial to the fate of the world, but it would certainly be a personal disaster. Never look in the mirrors in room 33. I've touched this point already, but it bears repeating. Never be rude to Mrs. Jones. Failure to observe that last rule is what got Jimmy. She dotted on him. I think he reminded her of her long-dead son, for she pampered him as if he were one of her own. Each morning she had breakfast ready for him before I had so much as opened my eyes, and she developed a habit of trailing along after him, complimenting his skill as he oiled rusted hinges or set a crooked picture straight. At first, Jimmy basked in the attention, but by the end of his second month, he was growing bored of Mrs. Jones, me, and the hotel itself. We pride ourselves on our facilities. If you need more activity than a turn around the green, we have a lovely indoor pool. It freezes over every now and then, but most of the time it's perfectly usable. Our library is unmatched. Although the room is cramped, it has every book imaginable. You only need to think of a particular title and it will appear on one of the shelves. And now that I've dragged us kicking and screaming into the 21st century, we have a wide array of streaming services. It wasn't enough for Jimmy. He wanted to go out, eat in a restaurant, watch a film in the cinema, see any face other than the ones he was surrounded by every day. He began having a drink each evening. One drink turned into several, and after a few weeks, the bar became his permanent residence between dusk and midnight. He wasn't the only one getting bored. I had been thrilled when he first arrived, ecstatic when he agreed to stay. How marvelous to feel real flesh beneath my fingers after 5 years of only the dead for company. What a relief to have some assistance in the many tasks required to keep the hotel running as it should. The more he drank, the less inclined he was to help or even spend time in my company. He no longer visited my bed, choosing a room for himself on the opposite end of the floor. When our paths did cross, at best he would ignore me. At worst, he would nitpick or outright rail against me, blaming me for his captivity. Still, I made an effort to be present whenever he frequented the bar. As lovely as Mrs. Jones can be, she does have a tendency to nag. Before and after her death, she was close to teetotal, only consenting to take a single sherry at Christmas, and drinking outside of special occasions is something of a bugbear of hers. "Think of your health, dear," she would tell Jimmy briskly. "You'll miss it when it's gone." Or, "How about we switch to a nice apple juice now? You've had quite enough to drink for one night." Most of the time, Jimmy managed to pull himself together enough to flash a charming smile and distract her with a compliment about her latest meal. But after one drink too many, I noticed him gritting his teeth and just barely managing to hold his tongue. It was better if I was present, playing the doting wife. I insisted on pouring his drinks, watering them down on out of sight. When Mrs. Jones' nagging bordered on relentless, I could always distract her with a game of gin rummy. On his final day, I was running behind. The ghoul on the second floor, usually the least demanding of our guests, had come down with some dreadful illness or else decided he wanted to inconvenience me. Either way, I had woken that morning to the foulest stench I had ever experienced. I followed it to his home and found every surface covered in putrid green blank gunge, its consistency somewhere between mucus and vomit. All day I scrubbed, taking only brief breaks to step outside before I fainted. By the time the room was restored to a passable state, I had filled several bin bags to bursting with filthy rags. It was already deep into the night. Mindful of the time, I paused only long enough to wash the streaks of muck from my arms and face before racing to the bar. I arrived just in time to hear Jimmy's last words. After he spat them at Mrs. Jones, she only stared for a small eternity, her mouth frozen in the motherly smile she wore whenever she scolded him. Then, like melted wax, her face began to shift. I shouted at Jimmy to run, but he didn't need to be told. Before the words left my mouth, he leapt from his bar stool and streaked through the door. Mrs. Jones followed him seconds later. Her lips were already peeling back to reveal rows upon rows of long, wickedly sharp fangs, while claws sprouted from beneath her lace-edged cuffs. I sprinted after them, but Jimmy was fueled by fear, and Mrs. Jones by whatever force propels the Mrs. Joneses of the world. I followed the screeching to the lobby. Breathless, I arrived to see he had arrived within mere feet of the entrance before Mrs. Jones grabbed him. Claws wrapped around his throat, she lifted him into the air. As I watched, her jaw unhinged, the lower part dropping so that it was nearly level with her chest. That sight drove all the sense out of my head, forgetting every rule my parents had ever drilled into me. I lunged at her. She batted me away as though I weighed no more than a fly. I crashed into the reception desk, the breath bursting from my lungs in a great whoosh. I was certain that I would die, for no amount of effort seemed to force air back into my aching chest. At last, as my vision began to dim, I managed to take a small gulp, then another, and another until I was able to draw myself together enough to regain my feet. By that time, Mrs. Jones had nearly finished her dinner. Jimmy's chest was splayed open, muscle and shattered ribs protruding every which way from his flesh, and she was devouring the last few bites of his heart. His head was angled towards me, the light had winked out from his eyes, and they still held his final terror, and an accusation which, I was quite certain, was directed at me. I'd like to say I felt only horror, but I couldn't help my sudden jolt of irritation. How many times had I told him to mind his manners? Mrs. Jones gulped, the sound thick and wet in her gullet, and dropped what remained of Jimmy to the floor. Then she turned to me. Here's another rule for you, one which I hope you never have cause to use. Never interfere with a kill. The Mrs. Jones who used to kiss my grazed knees, who argued with my mother for the right to read me bedtime stories, was no longer at the wheel. No amount of pleading or reasoning would move her. I could only run. Spinning around, I vaulted over the reception desk and raced for the office behind it. If Jimmy had not been out of his mind with fear and booze, he might have remembered the rules and survived. It was one of several staff-only rooms throughout the hotel warded to keep out unwanted guests. Just 10 steps from desk to door, yet it was the longest journey of my life. My hard-won breath burned my throat, my heart pounded in my ears, deafening me to all other sounds that Mrs. Jones' heavy, pounding footsteps, grasping the handle, her hot, copper-tanged breath was on my neck. Fire exploded in my flesh as she raked her claws down my back. A step further away, and I wouldn't have made it. The pain would have been too great. But I managed to throw myself into the office and slam the door before crumpling to the ground. Before I passed out, I heard her grunting and shrieking outside, furious that she couldn't get in. 3 days I spent in the office, emerging only to feed the thing in the cellar before scurrying back to my hiding place. Whenever I left, I tried not to look at the mangled heap that used to be Jimmy. There was no avoiding the smell, though. With no small difficulty and the help of a first aid kit, I managed to treat and bandage the wounds on my back. They bled sluggishly all throughout the first day, but thankfully didn't fester. On the morning of the fourth day, there was a tentative knock on the door followed by the sound of rapidly retreating footsteps. I waited until they had disappeared down the corridor before cracking the door open. On the floor was a freshly baked Victoria sponge and a beautifully written note of apology. It took every ounce of courage I possessed, but that evening I forced myself to go to the dining room. Mrs. Jones was waiting for me, her eyes red-rimmed, a steaming cottage pie on the table. I tried not to flinch as she took my hand, reiterating the apology she had already delivered in writing. The next morning, she helped me clean Jimmy up. We treated each other cautiously for a while, but eventually we got back to playing gin rummy again. When the scars on my back twinge, as they sometimes do, she helps me rub a soothing ointment into them. Even though I've told her it's not necessary, she apologizes every time. So you've heard my story and you have my proposal. If you think you could be the man for me, I invite you to visit. You will need to drink a cup of ram's blood, a pinch of nutmeg makes it a little more tolerable, and light a black candle before bedtime. When you next wake, you will find yourself at our gates. As travel arrangements go, it's hardly the Orient Express, but it beats the airfare. If you have read this without flinching, if you can stomach the journey to get here, if you can walk up to our door and find the nerve to open it, I have one more instruction for you. Just as you enter, look to your right. You will see a deep brown stain on the lobby carpet. I've scrubbed and scrubbed, but it just won't come out. Perhaps that's for the best. It's a good reminder of what will happen to you should you call Mrs. Jones a nosy old bat. And when you run into Jimmy, as you will, for he still likes hanging around the bar in the evening, his silvery wounds glistening as though they had just been inflicted, don't let him convince you. Sorry if there are any grammatical errors. I'm not exactly the best storyteller/writer, but I'll try my hardest. This story is about my aunt. So it was Christmas 2004. I was just under a year old at the time, and my brother was 4. Every year on my mom's side of the family, we would have a Christmas party with family members, and they'd all give each other gifts and eat, regular Christmas stuff. But my mother noticed that her stepsister didn't show up to the party. After many missed calls and failed attempts to contact her, she was getting sorta concerned, so she drove up to her house. After a bit of knocking, nothing. This was very odd, just knowing the person she is. She wouldn't have missed the Christmas party, plus she said she was going to come. So naturally, my mother gets concerned after a few hours and decides to call the police to go check on her. Apparently, since it was Christmas Day, the cops were being dicks about wanting to go in the house, saying things like, oh, she probably is out with friends, just because they didn't want to work. So my mother was like, all right, if you guys don't go in, I'm breaking in the house myself, which then they reluctantly agreed to go inside and look for her. My mother nervously waited outside with a look of great sadness. The cops walked back out. I'm sorry, but she's passed away, they said. Apparently, she was holding a gun, dead in her closet, gifts still waiting to be wrapped on the table. Whilst in workout attire, according to my mom, which is just so unusual for someone who is going to, commit S-word. But of course, the cops ruled it as an S-word, and to this day, nothing has ever come of it. And this is where it gets terrifying. For starters, right after she died, her husband moved away to Norway, which me personally, I believe is super suspicious. This already had my mother speculating that he had something to do with her death, but she couldn't be 100% sure, of course. Then, something completely bizarre happened. To this day, my mom has no rational explanation for this. But just a couple days after my aunt's death, my brother, a toddler by the way, goes up to my mother and says, "Aunt Elle told me you need to go to her house and find the second bullet in the wall, and that there's a key under a rock, and that you need to find out what really happened to her." Something like that. Which is completely crazy because my brother didn't know she had died, but apparently my aunt had been talking to him. My mother was so freaked out, he grabbed my brother and sat him in front of the cops to tell him what he was saying, and unfortunately, they didn't do anything about it. So my mom went to the house to look for this key my brother was talking about, and again, nothing came of it. So that's pretty much where this specific story ends. And I hope that one day, the person who did that to my aunt gets caught, because I wholeheartedly believe that she did not commit S-word. Some other smaller things I'll share about my brother. Apparently, he was always experiencing paranormal shit ages 2 to 5 years old, and remembers none of it. Here are some of those stories. Every night for months straight, he would have a reoccurring nightmare, where 3 crows, 1 fat, 1 skinny, 1 tall, would come to him and tell him he was going to lose 3 things, which is pretty fucking weird thing to be dreaming about as a little kid. When my mom used to work at a mattress firm, she'd bring my brother to work, and multiple times he would run to her crying, saying he was seeing people walk through the walls in the bathrooms. When I was a little baby, one night, my brother was sleepwalking, repeating the phrase, "The baby's room is on fire." And when my parents heard him, they checked on my room and saw a cord in the corner sparking and smoking. I have so many more scary stories, but that's just some of the creepiest ones I've heard from my mom. Apparently, my brother doesn't remember any of this, and I hope you at least enjoyed reading them, and it'd be super cool to see this in a video. Just get right back into the stories. I'll assign each batch of stories to the person who told them to me, KD. KD is a vet who's been an SAR officer for about 15 years. She specializes in high elevation mountain rescues and is widely considered one of the best in her field. She was one of the more enthusiastic storytellers, and since we were together a fair amount during exercises, she ended up telling me about 4 that really stuck with me. The first she told me in response to my asking about her most traumatic calls. She shook her head and told me that really bad calls happen more frequently on the mountain, since the potential for nasty accidents is higher. About 5 years ago, one of the parks she worked at had a string of disappearances. It was a bad year, she said, one of the worst on record as far as weather went. They were getting about a foot of new snow every couple of days, and there were a few avalanches that killed some hot climbers. They'd warned people about staying on the mapped areas, but of course there's always those who don't listen. In one particularly nasty case, an entire family got wiped out because the father decided he knew better than the officials, and he took them out into an area that wasn't safe. They were snowshoeing, and as best KD could figure, they'd walked onto a shelf of snow that looked solid but actually wasn't. It gave way, and this family went ass over tea kettle almost 300 feet down a slope. They landed on rocks at the bottom, and the parents died instantly. One of the kids did as well, but the other 2 survived. One had broken a leg and fractured ribs. The other was almost unharmed, save for some bruising and a sprained ankle. The uninjured kid left his sibling behind and set out to find help. Katie said the kid didn't make it more than half a mile before a storm overtook him. Kid stopped to try and get warm or maybe just to rest and ended up freezing to death. They ended up finding the family with the help of some witnesses who saw them heading out into the wilderness, and she was the one to find the kid who'd froze to death looking for help. She said it had started to snow, just enough to obscure long-distance vision, but not enough to make searching impossible. She saw a figure sitting in the snow up ahead, and she got to it as quickly as possible. She described, in detail, how as she got closer, she realized first that it was a child, second, that they were deceased, and third, that they had frozen in one of the most pitiful positions she'd ever found a corpse in. The kid was sitting upright, with his knees tucked up against his chest. His arms were cold around them, and his head was tucked up in his coat. When she moved the coat to look at his face, she saw that he'd died crying. His face was twisted and the tears were frozen on his cheeks. She said it was painfully obvious that the kid was terrified when he succumbed to hypothermia. And as a mother, it broke her heart.